Does that help Tesla? I mean, you had Tim Walz, who's a huge jerk, right? You know.
What if I told you that one unexpected move by Canada jeopardized the entire US auto industry? And that, as a result of that move, the economic situation for the US has escalated to the breaking point. This is not fiction, but a reality that is beginning to unfold right before our eyes.
Tesla is a peaceful company. We've never done anything harmful. I've never done anything harmful. I've only done productive things. So I think we just have a deranged, there's some kind of mental illness thing going on here, because this doesn't make any sense.
When Canada, out of the blue, announced new tariffs on strategic materials like nickel, lithium, and aluminum that are essential to the production of electric cars, the consequences weren't just economic, they shook an entire industry. Tesla, a company that has been a symbol of American innovation and clean technology, has been hit particularly hard. But now it found itself at the center of an international trade war. At this moment, when the electric car revolution was supposed to be gaining momentum, Canada has struck at the very heart of the American economy.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
Seconds are worth their weight in gold. Tesla's factories didn't stop instantly, but there were already signs of trouble. Production lines slowed down, battery prices began to rise, and investments began to leave. Imagine being an entrepreneur with a collapsing supply chain and your company dependent on raw materials that now cost several times as much. But the scary thing is that Tesla wasn't the only major player in danger of losing ground. Plenty of US auto plants, including giants like Ford and General Motors, have started to notice supply disruptions and rising material costs. But that's just the beginning. While economists debate what exactly caused these effects, the most important questions remain unanswered. How will the US auto industry grow now that competitors like China are ready to step into the vacuum left by this crisis? And more importantly, can America hold on to its position as a leader in electric cars if even its closest ally has turned against it?
Worse than expected, 336 and 68 vehicles, 336,068 vehicles delivered in the first quarter for Tesla. For a point of reference, the street was expecting, the street account was expecting, based on analyst expectations.
Canada's unexpected move has opened the gates to a new economic reality in which the US must now choose between fighting for its place in the market or ceding it to other powers. But the big question on the minds of millions, not only in the US but around the world, is recovery from such a blow possible? Or is this the beginning of the end of what was once considered an unshakable economic force? Stay tuned for a breakdown of how Canada's one step and the Trump government's decisions could change the future of the US auto industry and the global economy.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
When Canada announced new tariffs and export restrictions on key materials such as nickel, lithium, and aluminum, it came as a real shock to the US auto industry, which already seemed to be struggling mightily in the face of global economic instability. No one expected that the closest US ally could take such steps, undermining the very foundation of the US auto industry. This hit Tesla especially hard, whose success was directly dependent on a steady supply of these critical resources.
Running around on stage with the Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do. What a creep, what a jerk. Like who derives joy?
Before considering the implications for Tesla and other market players, it is worth understanding why Canada has become such an important link in the supply chain. Over the years, Canada has provided the US with a significant share of these materials, playing the role of not only a reliable partner, but also a key supplier to the largest automobile manufacturers in North America. The nickel, lithium, and aluminum needed to make batteries and other electric vehicle components have become critical resources for the US, especially as electric vehicles have grown in popularity in recent years.
That's from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. People just choosing with their wallets to not buy Teslas because of that Musk-Trump association. And actually here in London, an activist group called Everyone Hates Elon actually have been hacking bus stop signs with posters. I actually passed one yesterday. First, I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but it said the words 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. Illusion here, 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds or something. But this poster was alluding to the start of World War II, and the image was of Musk giving that hand salute that we saw at Trump's inauguration that many have attacked as a Nazi gesture. Musk, though, has neither admitted or denied what he was doing. But we're seeing the knock-on effect of that anti-Musk anger across Europe and in terms of sales.
But when Canada essentially took and broke that economic contract, the consequences for the US were disastrous. The transition from stability to chaos was lightning fast. A host of US factories running on Canadian materials faced enormous problems. Already in the first weeks after the new supply restrictions were imposed, Tesla plants in Nevada and Texas began to notice an increase in the cost of materials, as well as logistical problems. Logistics companies associated with sourcing materials from Canada began canceling contracts, citing the new tariffs and restrictions. This caused a real crisis in supplies for Tesla's production lines, leading to short-term delays and, worse, a significant increase in the cost of cars produced in these factories.
But they are not ruling out the possibility that this was arson. At the same time, as you just mentioned, there are groups that have been organizing ongoing and peaceful protests at Tesla dealerships around the world. These demonstrations targeting Elon Musk and his affiliation with the Trump administration. Italy's prime minister is said to be close friends with Musk, and there were reports that Teslas have been vandalized in her hometown in Italy. Diane.
The difficulties Tesla faced were not insignificant. The company, which had long been considered a leader in electric vehicles, found itself in a situation where its business model, which had relied on cheap and reliable Canadian resources, became vulnerable. Rising prices of components such as lithium and nickel caused unwarranted swings in the stock market, leading to panic among investors. Tesla's stock began to plummet, and the company was faced with a choice: either raise the prices of its cars, which would result in a loss of market share, or maintain the price and suffer losses due to the rising cost of raw materials. This dilemma jeopardized both the future of Tesla and the future of the entire US electric car market. Of course, for many, Canada's move was a political statement that affected not only the economy, but also Tesla's image as a company focused on global innovation. US officials began accusing Canada of using its economic potential as a tool to undermine the United States. But much more importantly, the very fact that such an important trading partner was striking a symbol of American progress, like Tesla, showed the vulnerability of even the most innovative and successful US companies. With this move, Canada not only questioned the stability of supply, but also emphasized that even the strongest ally can become a source of danger if the political situation and economic logic change. But Tesla's problems don't end there. Faced with rising material costs, the company has been forced to look for alternative sources of raw materials. However, this turned out to be not as easy a step as it seemed at first glance. Different countries like China and India began to strengthen their role in the global supply chain, offering terms that were much more favorable compared to Canada. For example, China offered Tesla long-term contracts to supply lithium at a price that was well below the market price. This could have been a lifesaver for Tesla, but in a political context, such a deal would have caused extremely negative consequences for the company's reputation in the US, as many would have perceived it as a concession to Chinese interests.
outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
This only added to the political tensions, as other US companies such as General Motors and Ford were also facing problems. This begs the question, what happens when your closest trading partners become your main competitors and potential business threats? It is important to realize that, on a global scale, trade wars between countries often have far more serious consequences than may first appear. As the events with Canada show, even those who were once considered allies can suddenly change their strategy and enter the economic arena as competitors. Tesla is not the only one under this pressure. The existence of many US factories powered by Canadian resources was threatened. Some companies began to suspend production, among other things because logistical congestion and rising tariffs led to a significant increase in the cost of final products. This situation led to a drop in production, mass layoffs and job cuts. In response, political rhetoric in the US began to shift. A growing number of voices called for America to strengthen its domestic production capacity and reduce its dependence on foreign supplies. However, this would require huge investment and time, which was becoming increasingly difficult. This may be the reason why the situation in the US auto industry was rapidly deteriorating. The trade war with Canada didn't just put American car companies at risk, it destroyed the very foundation on which the entire industry was built. While the US is still struggling with the effects of this crisis, the rest of the world is already moving on, and other countries like China, India, and even Canada are using this time to cement their position on the global stage. All of this calls into question the future of the American auto industry and electric cars in general.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
Canada, despite its reputation as a loyal partner in the North American economy, has decisively embarked on an independent economic strategy that has shocked the US. Its moves went beyond mere economic measures. They became a veritable political maneuver aimed at disrupting the established economic order and seizing leadership in the electric car industry. One of the most striking manifestations of this strategy was the imposition of 100% tariffs on Tesla and aggressive subsidies for Canadian electric car manufacturers. This double blow not only jeopardized American positions, but also laid the groundwork for a new economic system in which the US could find itself as an outsider. To understand the magnitude of this crisis, it is worth looking at exactly how Canada has used the environmental agenda to strengthen its economic position. As part of its efforts to combat global climate change and promote green technology, Canada's NDP party proposed a new initiative: impose a 100% tariff on all Tesla cars manufactured outside of Canada. The measure was presented as a move to support local manufacturers and reduce carbon footprints, but in reality it had much deeper political and economic implications. At the same time, the NDP proposed to subsidize Canadian electric vehicles to the tune of $10,000 for each model sold, making locally made products more attractive to Canadian consumers. This gesture was an element of so-called green nationalism, an attempt to use environmental initiatives to achieve economic dominance.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
For US automakers, especially Tesla, such moves were a real challenge. Prior to this, Tesla was considered not only a leader in American innovation, but also a symbol of the global transition to clean energy. The company heavily utilized Canadian resources such as lithium and nickel to produce its batteries. With the introduction of tariffs and subsidies, Canada has not only weakened Tesla's position, but also made local electric car manufacturers much more competitive. Cars from other brands made in Canada began to see huge demand among Canadian consumers, who could now buy a car at a much lower price thanks to the subsidies. This created a huge gap between American and Canadian manufacturers that was almost impossible to bridge in the short term. Against this backdrop of political and economic tensions, another important problem arose: the rise of nationalist sentiment in Canada. Domestic political debates began to overshadow rational perceptions of the situation. Canadian politicians, in an effort to strengthen the domestic economy and boost national pride, began to use this situation to strengthen their political positions. Namely, they began to argue that Canada's success with electric vehicles was the result not only of economic reforms but also of environmental responsibility. In turn, this rhetoric has increased pressure on the US, which finds itself in a situation where its environmental strategy and ambitions to reduce carbon emissions have come into question.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
The situation that is unfolding between the US and Canada is not only economic but also political. The shock measures taken by Canada have undoubtedly had repercussions that will reverberate between the two countries for a long time. For the US, it is not just a loss of financial resources and jobs. It is also a huge political liability that directly affects the future of the country. The economic situation caused by the change in the terms of trade has begun to spill over sharply into the political arena, especially as the election approaches. President Trump, as the main architect of the trade war with Canada, was faced with a difficult choice: continue the policy of tariffs and increase pressure on his closest neighbor, or back down, admit his mistakes and try to find a compromise. But while the situation inside the US was becoming increasingly dramatic, the international arena presented a different picture. While America continued its trade war with Canada, other countries began to occupy empty positions. China, which has greatly increased its influence on the global market in recent years, found itself in an advantageous position. Leading Chinese companies began to actively pursue deals with Canada, securing supplies of key materials for the production of electric vehicles and expanding their position in the North American region. China, which until then had been one of the main competitors of the US in the high-tech market, took advantage of the situation by creating new economic alliances and signing contracts with Canadian companies for 10-year supplies of lithium and other materials for battery production. During this time, the US continued to struggle with the consequences of its own decisions, losing its leading role in the global market. Despite its best efforts to maintain its economic strength, America was facing the fact that losing ground amidst instability and domestic economic problems put the country in an extremely vulnerable position. Canadian firms began receiving huge subsidies, making their products more competitive, which allowed them to significantly strengthen their position in the global electric car market. Now, even major automotive giants like Volkswagen and Ford have started moving production to Canada to take advantage of the tax breaks and subsidies provided by the local government. As for America itself, it faces a unique situation. A system that had been built for decades on the concept of free trade and mutually beneficial agreements was now collapsing. The domestic market was being torn apart. Companies that had focused on tariffs that were supposed to protect jobs were in crisis. Auto plants began to close, and workers who once proudly called themselves part of the country's industrial elite now faced layoffs. Factories that used to work smoothly as a unified system were now beginning to shut down. Following them down the chain are other manufacturing sectors. This is not just an economic collapse. It is the destruction of entire industrial clusters that have sustained the US economy for decades. While the US has been trying to fix its domestic problems, the world has not stood still. China and other countries that had capitalized on America's instability were already beginning to seize leadership positions in new industries, such as electric cars. Technology development and the building of new factories was happening faster than ever before. Against this backdrop, the US began to feel that it was losing its economic importance. America could no longer guarantee stability in its trade, and its political maneuvers began to be perceived as unreasonable and destabilizing. In such a situation, the question of what next becomes even more important. How can America regain its position on the world stage? There are no answers yet. Political and economic instability at home, amplified by external challenges, makes this virtually impossible in the short term. The US, which was once not only an economic giant, but also a political leader on the world stage, now risks losing its relevance if it does not find ways to stabilize and reset its domestic economic strategy. A new world order in which America may find itself as an isolated player is beginning to take shape, and the process is unstoppable.